I remember the night it all unraveled, the scent of rain-soaked pavement, the distant hum of traffic, and the silence in our home that had felt unfamiliar for months. 8 years of marriage, woven with love, laughter, and whispered dreams, had shattered in the time it took me to read a single text message. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was unforgettable. Same place tomorrow? The sender's name was saved under a generic alias, but the meaning was unmistakable. My hands trembled as I scrolled up, uncovering a history of messages I should never have seen, reservations at restaurants I had never dined at, late-night confessions of passion, promises made in the dark. My wife, my best friend, my partner, my everything, had been living a double life, and I had been too blind to see it. The confrontation. That night I sat in the living room waiting, the clock hands dragged. My heart pounded. When she walked through the door, shaking the rain from her coat, she froze at the sight of me. Maybe it was my expression. Maybe she just knew. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice a whisper of a man who had already lost everything. For a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt, hesitation, regret. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. "You went through my phone?" she countered, her voice clipped, defensive. Not an answer. "Answer me," I pressed. "Who is he?" Silence stretched between us, and then, softly, she laughed. Not a laugh of amusement, but a bitter, hollow sound. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. It doesn't matter, as if 8 years of devotion, of building a life together meant nothing, as if I was nothing. The descent into shadows. The days that followed were a haze of pain, whiskey and sleepless nights. I scoured our past for clues I had missed. Late meetings, sudden interest in her phone, the way she had started to pull away from me months ago. How long had I been a fool? How long had I been living a lie? But grief has a way of sharpening a man. And as I pieced together her deception, a single nagging thought emerged. Something didn't add up. A twist in the tale, the name from the messages. It didn't belong to some nameless lover. It belonged to a man who no longer existed. A man who had died 6 months ago in a car accident. My heart pounded as I dug deeper. Old messages, deleted emails, bank statements. And then, there it was. Something far worse than infidelity. Bank withdrawals. Secret transactions. A hidden safety deposit box. This wasn't just an affair. My wife had been keeping something from me, something dangerous, the truth. At last, confrontation, round 2. This time, I wasn't broken. This time, I was ready. I held up the evidence, watched, as her face drained of color. "You weren't just cheating," I said. "You were stealing, laundering money. And now the man you were doing it with is dead." Her lip trembled, but she said nothing. "Did you kill him?" I asked. She flinched. And that was all the answer I needed. The final move. They say love makes you blind. But betrayal? Betrayal makes you see everything. The next morning, I walked into the police station with everything I had gathered. Names, dates, bank records, a story of deceit, greed, and murder. As they took my statement, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Relief. My wife had shattered me. But in doing so, she had set me free. And as they put her in handcuffs that evening, her eyes wide with shock, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my story, it was just the beginning. I watched from a distance as they led her out of our home, my home now, in handcuffs. The flashing blue and red lights of the police cars painted her face in cold, flickering colors. She didn't struggle, didn't protest. She just turned, her head locking eyes with me for one last time. There was no apology in her stare, no remorse, only something darker, a warning, the unfinished business. The next few weeks passed in a blur of police interviews and legal proceedings. Every day, another piece of her secret life unraveled. The man she had been involved with, Daniel Carter, wasn't just her lover. He had been her partner in crime. Together, they had siphoned money from an investment firm, covering their tracks, with fake identities and offshore accounts. Then, 6 months ago, Daniel died in a car crash, a suspicious one. Now my wife was facing charges of fraud, conspiracy, and, if they could prove it, murder. But something didn't sit right with me. If she had really killed Daniel, why hadn't she run? Why had she stayed with me, playing the role of a loving wife as if nothing had happened? Unless she was never the mastermind. Unless someone else was still out there, watching, waiting. A visitor in the dark. It was a little after midnight when I heard the knock at my door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I hesitated before opening it. A man stood on my doorstep, dressed in a dark coat, his face half hidden beneath the glow of the street lamp. He wasn't a cop, he wasn't a lawyer, but he knew my name. "You need to come with me," he said. "Who the hell are you?" He exhaled sharply, glancing over his shoulder before stepping closer. "You think this is over?" His voice was low, urgent. "You think turning her in was the end of it?" I felt a cold knot twist in my stomach. "She didn't kill Daniel," he continued. "She was set up." I clenched my jaw. "By who?" He hesitated. Then quietly he said a name that made my blood turn to ice, a name I knew, a name I had trusted, the real puppet master. Everything I thought I knew had been a lie. My wife wasn't innocent. Far from it. But she hadn't been pulling the strings. Someone else had orchestrated everything. Someone who had been close to me all along. A business partner, a friend, a man I had confided in, turned to for advice when my marriage started falling apart. It had all been deliberate. The money laundering, the affair, even Daniel's death. And now they were coming for me. The hunt. Begins, I had 2 choices. Sit back and let them erase me the way they had erased Daniel, or step into the shadows and become something else, something ruthless, something unpredictable. I looked at the man in front of me, the messenger, the warning. "Tell me everything," I said, because this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was war. The man, who still hadn't given me his name, stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He moved like someone who was used to looking over his shoulder, like someone who had been living in the shadows for a long time. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into," he said, his voice low. "They won't stop coming." I crossed my arms. "Who exactly is they?" He exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "The people who really ran the operation. Your wife and Daniel? They were just pawns." I felt my fists clench. "Then why set her up? Why kill Daniel?" "Because he got greedy. He wanted out. And in this business?" The man shook his head. "There is no out." My pulse hammered in my ears. If Daniel had been eliminated for trying to leave, what did that mean for my wife? And worse, what did that mean for me? The shadow of the past I had thought turning her in would be the end of it. That I could just walk away, rebuild my life. But now, I understood the truth. I wasn't just a heartbroken husband anymore. I was a loose end. And in their world, loose ends didn't stay alive for long. A dead man's secrets. "You need to come with me," the man repeated. I didn't trust him, but I trusted my instincts, and they were screaming that I had no other choice. So I grabbed my coat, locked the door behind me, and followed him into the night. We drove in silence, the city lights flickering past us like ghosts. Finally, after what felt like an hour, we pulled up in front of a rundown storage facility on the outskirts of town. The man got out first, scanning the area before nodding for me to follow. "What the hell is this place?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he led me down a row of units, stopping at one near the back. He pulled out a key, unlocked it, and slid the metal door open. Inside, under the dim glow of a single overhead light, was a stack of boxes. Files, hard drives, a laptop. Daniel Carter's secrets, the proof of everything. I stepped inside, my breath catching as I flipped open one of the files. Bank records, offshore accounts, names, and there, at the top of one of the pages, was the name of the man I had once called my closest friend, the real mastermind. No turning back. The man beside me watched my expression carefully. "Now you understand?" he said. "You're in the middle of this, whether you like it or not." I closed the file, my jaw tight. My wife's betrayal had shattered me. But this had rebuilt me into something else, something dangerous. I turned to him, my voice steady. "What's the next move?" Because I wasn't running. Not anymore. I was going to burn them all down. I sat in the dimly lit storage unit, my fingers brushing over the pages of evidence. Offshore accounts, wire transfers, names of corporations I'd never heard of, but at the top of it all, the name that made my stomach turn. Adam Lennox, my best friend, my confidant, the man who had been at my side through everything, my wedding, my darkest moments, my slow unraveling, and now the man who had orchestrated my destruction, the man who had framed my wife, the man who had killed Daniel Carter. Felt the weight of the truth press down on me like a vice. The betrayal of my wife had gutted me. But this ignited something else entirely. Rage. "How do I know this isn't a setup?" I asked, turning to the stranger beside me. He smirked, pulling out a thumb drive and holding it up between two fingers. "Because I have proof," he said. "Everything you need to take him down. Recordings, documents, even surveillance footage." I clenched my jaw. "And why the hell are you helping me?" The man leaned against the metal wall, arms crossed. "Because Adam tried to kill me too." That caught me off guard. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a long, jagged scar running down his forearm. "He doesn't just eliminate loose ends. He makes sure they suffer first." I stared at the scar, then at him. "Who are you?" I asked. He smiled grimly. "Someone who wants revenge just as much as you do." Setting the trap, taking down a man like Adam Lennox wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't just rich. He was connected. A whisper in the right ear, and a man could disappear without a trace. So we had to be careful, precise. I spent the next few days watching him from a distance, studying his routines, his movements, his weaknesses. He was careful, but not careful enough. He still trusted me. That was his mistake, because I was about to become the monster he never saw coming. The meeting I called Adam that night. "Hey, man," I said, keeping my voice light. "I need to talk, in person." A pause. Then, "You okay?" I swallowed back the venom rising in my throat. "No, but I need a friend." It was a test. If he knew I was onto him, he'd refuse. He'd make an excuse. Instead, he sighed. "Of course, man. My place, hook, line, and sinker." "Yeah," I said. "See you soon." The unraveling an hour later, I stood in Adam's sleek, high-rise apartment, whiskey glass in hand. He looked the same as he always had, polished, confident, the perfect picture of success. "Talk to me," he said, leaning back in his chair. I set the glass down, studying him. "It's about Claire." His expression didn't change, but I saw it. The flicker of calculation. "What about her?" I let out a heavy breath, as if I were struggling to get the words out. I don't know what to do. I keep thinking, what if she was set up? What if she didn't kill Daniel?" He gave me a sympathetic look. "That's the grief talking, man. You did the right thing turning her in. She wasn't who you thought she was." I nodded slowly. "Maybe." A long silence. Then I pulled my phone from my pocket and set it on the table between us. Or maybe, I said, my voice calm, she was just following your orders. Adam's face didn't change, but his fingers tightened around his glass. Careful, calculating. You sure you want to say that to me? He asked softly. I leaned forward. I know everything, Adam. The accounts, the fake companies, Daniel. He exhaled, setting his drink down. That's unfortunate. For a split second, the room was deathly still. Then, he lunged. The reckoning, I had anticipated it. The moment his hand moved, I was already out of my chair. The whiskey glass shattered as he lunged for my throat, but I ducked, slamming my fist into his ribs. Adam was fast, but I was fueled by something more than instinct. I was fueled by justice, by revenge. We crashed into the coffee table, knocking, over a lamp. Adam reached for something, a knife hidden beneath the couch, but before he could grab it, I pressed my knee into his chest and held up my phone. The screen was still lit, the call still active. Everything you just said, I panted, was recorded. His eyes flickered with something almost amused. You think that's enough? He sneered. You think they'll believe you? I smirked. They don't have to. Sirens blared in the distance. Adam's face paled. You son of a... I cut him off with a hard punch, knocking him out cold just as the door burst open. The end of the line. The cops swarmed in, guns drawn. They found the files, the offshore accounts, the money laundering. And Adam Lennox? He was done. I watched as they dragged him away, his once perfect life crumbling in real time. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. I wasn't the broken husband anymore. I wasn't the betrayed fool. I was the man who had torn down an empire built on lies. And as I stepped into the night, inhaling the cold air, I realized something. I was finally free. 3 months had passed since Adam Lennox had been dragged away in handcuffs. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Offshore accounts, shell companies, bribed officials, all of it led back to him. He tried to cut a deal, to weasel his way out, but there was no escape. Adam was sentenced to 25 years without parole. I should have felt relief. I should have felt free. But something wasn't right. The letter had arrived on a quiet Sunday morning, tucked between my bills and junk mail. A simple white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Did you really think this was over? No name, no signature, just a feeling, a creeping, suffocating feeling like I was being watched. The deeper game. I didn't want to believe it, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Adam was smart, careful, connected. He had been powerful, but he hadn't been the power. Someone else had been pulling the strings all along, someone who was still out there, watching, waiting, and now they knew my name. One last move. I picked up the letter, reading it again. My heart was steady. My hands didn't shake. I had already been through hell. I had already lost everything. And if they thought I was just going to lie down and disappear, they were wrong. Dead wrong. I pulled out my phone, dialing a number I swore I'd never use again. The line clicked. A voice answered. You got my message, the man on the other end said. I exhaled slowly. Yeah, I said. Now tell me, who do I need to? Kill! The voice on the other end of the line chuckled softly. Not in amusement, more like approval. I was hoping you'd say that, he said. I clenched my jaw. No games, no riddles. Who sent the letter? A pause. Then, meet me at the old train yard, midnight. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my pulse steady. This was it. The moment I stepped off the edge of what I thought was revenge and into something bigger. Because if Adam Lennox had been powerful, then the people above him were something else entirely, and they knew I was coming. Midnight meeting. The train. Yard was deserted when I arrived. Rusted tracks, forgotten freight cars, and the occasional flicker of a dying floodlight. I stayed in the shadows, watching, listening. Then a figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, composed, wearing a sleek, dark suit, out of place in a setting like this. But what caught my attention was the calm in his eyes, like he had done this 100 times before. "You've been asking the wrong questions," he said, stepping closer. "Adam Lennox was never the true mastermind." "Then who was?" I asked, keeping my stance relaxed but ready. He smiled slightly. "Not was, is." A cold chill ran down my spine. "Adam was a lieutenant," the man continued. "One of many. There's an entire structure above him. People who make real decisions. And now," he tilted his head, "they know you exist." I inhaled slowly. "So what happens now?" The man pulled something from his pocket, a second letter, identical to the one I had received. He handed it to me. I opened it. Inside, one simple message: "We are watching. Choose wisely." The fork in the road. The man watched me carefully. "You have two options," he said. "You can walk away. Forget this ever happened. Live a quiet life." He took a step closer. Or, his voice dropped lower. "You can take the fight to them. But if you do, you won't be fighting a single man. You'll be going to war with an entire organization, one that has buried people far more powerful than you." I looked down at the letter. I thought about Claire, my wife, sitting in a prison cell for crimes she didn't commit. I thought about Daniel Carter, who died trying to escape. I thought about the years of my life that had been manipulated by unseen hands. I exhaled slowly. Then I met his eyes. "Tell me everything. The hunt begins." He smiled. "Then we start now." Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about burning them all to the ground. The man led me deeper into the shadows of the train yard, where an unmarked black SUV sat idling. The tinted windows made it impossible to see who, if anyone, was inside. "Get in," he said. I hesitated. "Trust me," he added. I laughed under my breath. Trust. That's a word that got me into this mess. His expression didn't change. "Then consider this your first test." I glanced around. The train yard was quiet, but I could feel it. We weren't alone. I opened the door and slid inside. The truth in the dark inside. The SUV. Another man sat waiting. Older, maybe in his mid-50s, with graying hair and a face lined by years of experience. He turned to me, studying me with the sharp eyes of someone who had seen too much. "My name is Grayson," he said, "and I used to work for the same people who ruined your life." I stayed silent. He exhaled. "We've been watching you, waiting to see if you'd make the right choice. And now that you have, there's no turning back." I leaned forward. "Start talking." Grayson nodded. "Adam Lennox was powerful, yes, but he was only a middleman. The real power structure is something much bigger. It's called the Aegis Group. The name meant nothing to me, but something in the way he said it made my gut tighten. Their hands are in everything: finance, politics, law enforcement. People disappear when they ask the wrong questions. People like Daniel Carter. And people like me," I muttered. Grayson nodded. "They framed your wife because they needed a scapegoat. Adam was getting reckless. Someone had to take the fall." I clenched my fists. "Who's at the top?" Grayson exhaled. "That's the problem. No one knows. The real leaders never show their faces. They communicate through intermediaries, layers of deception. Even Adam never saw the full picture." I processed his words. "So how do we find them?" Grayson smirked. "We don't." I raised an eyebrow. Then what the hell am I doing here? He leaned in. We don't find them. We make them come to us. The bait Grayson pulled out a small flash drive and handed it to me. This is everything Adam tried to hide. Accounts, transactions, a blueprint of their operations. If we leak even a fraction of this, they'll come out of hiding to shut us down. I turned the flash drive over in my hand. You're using me as bait. Exactly, Grayson said. But not just bait, the fuse. I glanced at the man who had brought me here. He hadn't spoken since we entered the SUV. What's his story? I asked. Grayson smirked. That's Dante. He's very good at making problems disappear. Dante finally spoke, his voice low and calm. Let's hope you don't become one of those problems. The first. I leaned back in the seat, staring at the flash drive. This was insane. Suicidal. But the alternative? Walking away while these people continued ruining lives? Not an option. I slipped the flash drive into my pocket and met Grayson's gaze. When do we start? He smiled. We already have. The target an hour later, I was sitting in a high-rise apartment staring at a laptop screen. Dante stood near the window, watching the street below. On my screen was a name. Vincent Holloway, Aegis Group operative. A man who handled cleanup jobs. For them, he was their fixer. And if we wanted to draw them out, he was our first target. Grayson placed a phone next to me. We leak just enough data to rattle him. Then we watch how he reacts. I nodded. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Then, with a deep breath, I hit send. Somewhere in the city, Vincent Holloway's phone buzzed. Somewhere in the city, the first domino fell. And just like that, the hunt began. The moment I hit send, the game changed. Somewhere in the city, Vincent Holloway, the Aegis Group's fixer, their cleaner, had just received a message, a fragment of data, just enough to shake him. Now we had to see how he'd react. Grayson leaned against the counter, watching me. You ever hunted a predator before? I glanced at him. Not like this. He smirked. Then you're about to learn something real fast. Holloway won't run. He won't panic. He'll do what he does best. Eliminate the threat. I exhaled. Which means he's coming for me. Dante, still by the window, gave a slow nod. And when he does, we make sure he doesn't walk away. Vincent Holloway, 15 miles away, in a private club that required more than just money to enter, Vincent Holloway sat in a leather booth, sipping a glass of neat whiskey. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it once, then a second time. The message wasn't from a known contact, just a single attachment, a financial record, one of his records. Holloway didn't react. He set his glass down, exhaled through his nose, and stood up. He had one rule. Control the problem before it controls you. Within 30 seconds, he was making calls. Within 60, he was mobilizing assets. Whoever sent this message had just made their first and last mistake. The setup back in the apartment. Dante's phone vibrated. He checked the screen, then turned to Grayson. He's moving, he said simply. Grayson grinned. Told you. I leaned forward. Where? Dante handed me a burner phone with a tracking app open. He just made 3 calls. One to a private security team, one to an off-the-books IT specialist, and one to a cop. I frowned. A cop? Grayson sighed. Aegis has dozens of police under their thumb. He's checking if any of them can trace where the leak came from. Dante cracked his knuckles. And we're going to make sure they don't. Laying the trap, we had 2 options. Run. Ditch the apartment, erase our trail, and try to stay ahead of Holloway. Turn the tables. Let him come to us. On our terms. I wasn't in the mood to run. We hit back, I said. Grayson smirked. I was hoping you'd say that. Dante grabbed his jacket. Then let's go hunting. The meeting point. We chose a neutral ground, an underground parking garage, half abandoned. Dante had set up cameras. A second burner phone had been used to send another message to Holloway. Come alone, or this goes public. 20 minutes later, a blacked-out Mercedes rolled in. Vincent Holloway stepped out. He wasn't what I expected. No flashy suit, no bodyguards. Just a man in his 40s, lean but strong, with cold, calculating eyes. He adjusted his sleeves, scanning the lot. "All right," he said. "You got my attention." I stepped forward, heart steady. "Then let's talk." Holloway tilted his head. "No, let's not." I barely saw his hand move. A gun, silencer attached. I dove left just as the shot fired. The bullet whizzed past my head, hitting the pillar behind me. Dante was already moving. The fight Dante tackled Holloway, knocking the gun loose. They hit the concrete hard, trading brutal strikes. Grayson grabbed the gun, tossing it away. I scrambled to my feet as Holloway flipped Dante over, slamming him into the ground. The man was fast, but I was faster. I drove my knee into his ribs. Holloway grunted, twisting away. He lunged at me, but I was ready. I caught his wrist, turned, used his momentum against him. He hit the ground hard. Dante was on him in an instant, locking an arm around his throat. "Stay down." Holloway struggled for a moment. Then finally he went still. We had him. The interrogation. Minutes later, Holloway was tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse. I stood in front of him. He was bleeding from his lip but smiling. "You have no idea what you've started," he said. I crouched. "Who's pulling the strings?" He chuckled. "You're already dead. You just don't know it yet." Dante cracked his knuckles. "Maybe we should remind him who's holding the gun." Holloway exhaled through his nose. "It doesn't matter. You can kill me. Aegis will send someone else." I leaned in. "Then tell me how to stop them." Holloway smirked, then whispered 2 words. "Find Elysium." I froze. Grayson's face darkened. Dante muttered a curse. "What the hell is Elysium?" I asked. Holloway grinned, teeth stained with blood, and then from inside his jacket I heard a beeping sound. My stomach dropped. Grayson's eyes widened. "Shit!" Boom! A blast of fire and smoke tore through the warehouse. I hit the ground hard, ears ringing, flames licking at the walls. Through the smoke I saw Dante pulling Grayson to his feet. Holloway was gone. Not dead. Gone. And in my head, his last words echoed like a death sentence. "Find Elysium." The explosion had been surgical. Not meant to kill us, just to erase evidence. Vincent Holloway was gone. We had only 2 things left. The words, "Find Elysium." A deep, gut-wrenching certainty that Aegis was now fully aware we were coming. After the blast, we regrouped at a safe house, a nameless apartment Grayson had set up years ago, the kind of place where the walls had no memories and the windows stayed shut. Dante stitched up a cut on his arm. I sat at the table, staring at my shaking hands. Adrenaline still buzzed through my veins. Grayson poured a drink. "Elysium." He said the name like it was a ghost. "You know what it means," I said. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow sip of whiskey, eyes distant. Then, finally, "It's not a place. It's a program." I leaned forward. "Explain." Grayson exhaled. "Elysium is Aegis's insurance policy. It's how they stay untouchable. If someone gets too close, if a government, a corporation, or even a person starts asking the wrong questions, Elysium erases them." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "So it's a kill list." Grayson shook his head. "Worse." Dante finally spoke. "It's a rewrite." I frowned. "What?" Grayson set his glass down. "Elysium doesn't just eliminate people, it erases them from existence." I blinked. "That's not possible." Dante gave a humorless chuckle. "That's what everyone thinks. Until it happens to them." Grayson continued, his voice lower now. "Imagine someone powerful. An official, a journalist, a CEO, gets in Aegis's way. They don't just disappear. Their history disappears, their bank accounts, their records, their fingerprints, even their name. Everything wiped, as if they never existed. My breath caught. That explained Daniel Carter. That explained why my wife was framed so perfectly, why there was no evidence, no loophole, no way to fight back. Elysium didn't just erase people, it erased the truth. The clock is ticking. Dante crossed his arms. The second Holloway said Elysium, he signed his own death warrant. And ours, I muttered. Grayson nodded. Aegis will come for us now, fast and hard. I stared at the floor. My mind spun through possibilities, through ways out. Then, I realized, there's no running, is there? I asked. Dante shook his head. No, they'll track us, cut off our resources, frame us. One day we'll just be gone. Grayson leaned in, which means we have one chance. I looked at him. We don't run. We flip the board. The plan Elysium was not invincible. It operated like a ghost, but somewhere it had to be controlled by real people. Aegis agents, programmers, money, men. We had to find them. Grayson pulled out a burner laptop. I have a contact, a deep web info broker, named Cypher, Dante scoffed. That guy's a lunatic. He's also the only person who's ever seen Elysium's code and lived. I clenched my jaw. Where do we find him? Grayson sighed. That's the tricky part. Last I heard, he was in Prague. I exhaled. Then we're going to Prague, Dante smirked. Hope you packed your bags, boss. I stood. My pulse was steady. The fear was gone. They had erased everything I loved. Now I was going to erase them. The war had just begun. We landed in Prague under false names, using passports Grayson had arranged. The city was cold, draped in a gray mist, the kind that made everything feel like a memory. I adjusted my coat, scanning the street. Where do we find Cypher? Grayson exhaled. That's the problem. He doesn't stay in one place. He moves like a shadow, always a step ahead of people like us. Dante smirked. Good thing we're not people like us. The first lead Grayson's contact pointed us toward an underground hacker bar called the Catacombs. It wasn't on any maps, but if you knew the right alleys, the right doors, it wasn't hard to find. A steel door, no signs, just a small intercom. Dante knocked. A voice crackled through the speaker. Password? Grayson answered without hesitation. Ghost protocol. A heavy lock clicked and the door swung open. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette, smoke, and whispers. Neon screens flashed stolen data, faces lit by the glow of 100 secrets. Dante muttered under his breath. Feels like home. We moved deeper into the room, past a poker game where men with dead eyes played for something worth more than money. Then, finally, we found him. Cypher, he was younger than I expected. Mid-30s, maybe. Messy hair, round glasses that made him look more like a college dropout than the most dangerous hacker in Europe. But his eyes, sharp, calculating, gave him away. He leaned back as we approached. Took you long enough. Grayson slid into the seat across from him. I thought you didn't meet in person, Cypher grinned. I don't, but for Elysium, I'll make an exception. I leaned forward. You know what it is. Cypher chuckled. I know what it was. Dante frowned. Past tense? Cypher's smile faded. He tapped a cigarette against the table, thinking. Elysium started as a data purge system. Black book operations, deep cover identities. If a spy or an asset needed to disappear, Elysium made them invisible. No records, no paper trails. I nodded. That lines up with what we know. Cypher exhaled. But then Aegis did what Aegis does. They turned it into something else. His fingers danced across his tablet, pulling up a fragmented code screen. It looked like digital ruins, bits of corrupted data, like pieces of a shattered mirror. This is all I could recover. Grayson narrowed his eyes. What are we looking at? Cypher tapped the screen. This isn't just about erasing people. I felt my pulse quicken. What is it then? Cypher looked up. It's about rewriting them. The truth about Elysium ciphers. Voice dropped lower. Elysium doesn't just delete identities. It replaces them. If Aegis wants you gone, they don't just erase your records. They create new ones that turn you into whatever they need. Dante clenched his jaw. Like making someone a criminal overnight. Cypher nodded. Or a terrorist, or a dead man. I exhaled. That explained everything. My wife, Daniel Carter, everyone Aegis had destroyed. Grayson sat back. So how do we shut it down? Cypher hesitated. You don't. Silence. Then Dante leaned forward. Wrong answer. Cypher adjusted his glasses. You don't get it. Elysium isn't a server or a database. It's an entire network scattered across multiple locations. If you shut down one, the others rebuild it. It's like cutting off the head of a hydra. I frowned. There's always a way. Cypher sighed. There is one possibility, but it's suicide. Grayson smirked. Those are our favorite kind. Cypher leaned in. There's a failsafe built into the system, a final command meant to be used if Elysium ever got compromised. Dante raised an eyebrow. A kill switch? Cypher nodded. Exactly. But it's not digital. It's a physical mechanism, and it's buried inside Aegis's most secure facility. I swallowed. Where? Cypher hesitated. Then, finally, Geneva. The clock starts. Now Grayson exhaled. Switzerland, Dante whistled. Europe's most locked-down city? Hell, they don't even let pigeons fly too close without a security clearance. Cypher smirked. Now you see why I called it suicide. I checked my watch. Aegis wouldn't wait long before coming after us. We don't have a choice, I said. Grayson nodded. Then we move fast. Cypher leaned back. There's just one more problem. Dante sighed. Of course there is. Cypher locked eyes. With me. Before you get to Geneva, you're going to have to deal with Vincent Holloway. I stiffened. Cypher slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a live security feed, a street outside, a man in a coat, watching the building. Holloway, he had found us. Cypher exhaled. You've got 5 minutes before he makes his move. I cracked my knuckles. That's all I need. The clock was ticking. Cypher's warning echoed in my head. 5 minutes. Holloway was too close, and he didn't make mistakes. The man was a professional, a predator. He didn't come for the kill unless he knew he could finish it. Dante, Grayson, and I exchanged quick, silent looks. We didn't have the luxury of indecision. Ambush him, I said. Grayson cracked a grin. Finally, something we can do. Setting the trap, the plan was simple. We couldn't fight Holloway head-on, not in his element. He had the advantage. The streets, the city, the shadow of Aegis looming over him. But what he didn't know was that we weren't just 3 men cornered in a tech-infested room. We were wolves now. We knew the city's underbelly, the places where light couldn't reach. We set up on the upper floors of a building overlooking the street below. Grayson set up the equipment, his fingers dancing over the keys, disabling surveillance cameras. Dante scouted the side entrances, waiting like a coiled spring. And me? I stood in the shadows, my eyes focused on the street. Holloway was out there, somewhere, watching. Then I saw him, a figure in a coat standing across the street, scanning the building like a hawk. That's him, I whispered. Dante nodded. Let's move. The game of shadows. We moved fast, too fast for Holloway to react. I slid into the stairwell, keeping my steps light but firm. Dante followed, close behind. Grayson stayed at the controls, tracking Holloway's every move. We could hear him. His footsteps, the rustle of his jacket as he moved toward the building entrance. He was getting closer. Then, nothing. Silence. Where is he? Grayson's voice crackled through the comms. I paused. He's here somewhere. Be patient. Then the door creaked. Dante and I were ready. We sprang into action, charging toward the door, moving with precision. The moment the door cracked open, we were on him. The confrontation, Holloway didn't flinch. He'd already calculated our move. He sidestepped, pulling a sleek, compact pistol from inside his coat. But he didn't fire. His eyes met mine, and for a second, there was mutual recognition. He wasn't surprised. He was impressed. You're faster than I expected, he said, his voice cold, calculating. Did you think we wouldn't catch up? I replied, keeping my stance firm. Dante circled behind him, cutting off his escape route. You're a dead man, Holloway. Holloway's lips twitched into a smile. Not today. He was always one step ahead. In a flash, Holloway spun and fired a shot, straight for Dante's chest, but Dante was already moving, deflecting the bullet with a well-timed dive to the side. The round missed by inches, grazing the wall behind. Us! I reached out, grabbing Holloway's wrist, locking his arm in a hold. He tried to break free, but I twisted, pushing him back against the wall with the strength of years of training. You should have stayed hidden, I growled, bringing him face to face with the truth. We were done running, but Holloway, ever the strategist, just laughed. You really think you can stop Aegis? He taunted. They'll kill you both. It's already over. His words hit harder than I expected. The cold reality of Aegis loomed behind every corner, in every shadow. We were fighting the system, a system that had endless resources and had already proven it could wipe us out without hesitation. Grayson's voice broke through my thoughts. He's bluffing. Hold him. I tightened my grip. You think I'm bluffing? Holloway spat, blood trickling from his lip. Aegis is everywhere. You'll never make it out alive. They'll find you, and Elysium will erase you. I leaned in closer. Maybe. But not today. The turning point. Then something unexpected happened. Holloway's expression shifted ever so slightly, as if something clicked in his mind. I didn't think you'd be so determined, he said, his voice almost thoughtful. But you're right. He inhaled deeply. You might survive this after all. I narrowed my eyes. What's that supposed to mean? He took a slow breath and, just when I thought he was about to strike again, he whispered, You need to get to Geneva. The failsafe is there. But it's not just about shutting Elysium down. I paused, confused. What do you mean? Holloway's lips curled into a grin. The failsafe doesn't just erase the system. It erases Aegis, the entire organization. It was designed to destroy everything, every secret. If you activate it, he trailed off, his voice dark. You won't just erase Elysium, you'll destroy the whole damn empire. Grayson stiffened. What do you want from us? Holloway met my eyes, his expression unreadable. I'm giving you the key. Take it. He reached into his coat and pulled out a data chip, the kind used for deep-level encryption. Dante looked at me, hesitating. This could be a trap. I took the chip. If it is, we'll deal with it. We need a way in. Holloway leaned back, his voice low and ominous. You'll be dead before you get there. But if you succeed, I'll be watching from the shadows. The weight of Holloway's words hung over us like a dark cloud. The data chip felt like a ticking bomb, a promise of both freedom and doom. I could see it in Dante's eyes. He wasn't convinced that Holloway was giving us a gift. And Grayson? He was already calculating the risks of a plan that might just take us straight into the heart of hell. But we couldn't afford to hesitate. Every second we spent questioning Holloway's motives was a second Aegis was using to tighten the noose around our necks. I pocketed the chip, feeling its cold edges press into my side like a reminder of the decision that was already made. "We don't have time to sit on this," I said, breaking the silence that had fallen over the room. "We move now." Grayson looked at me, his face hard but not without a touch of admiration. "You're sure about this?" I nodded. There's no turning back. The path to Geneva. The journey to Geneva was a blur of motion, a series of nameless flights, hidden safe houses, and ever-watchful eyes in the dark. We kept a low profile, moving like ghosts, careful not to leave any trail Aegis could follow. But even in the shadows, it felt like we were being hunted. Every passing face on the street, every lingering figure in a cafe, it felt as though someone knew who we were and where we were going. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. The closer we got to Geneva, the more I could feel the pressure mounting. Geneva, the home of high finance and power, a city of secrets and shadow deals. A city where the richest and most powerful met in the heart of Aegis's empire. But it was also a city of revelation, and that's what kept us moving forward. Arrival in Geneva. When we arrived in Geneva, we wasted no time. The city was pristine, its streets immaculate, but beneath the surface was the dark pulse of something much more sinister. As we made our way through the narrow alleyways and hidden streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already too late. We had one objective: find the failsafe, destroy Elysium, and take down Aegis. But what if that was exactly what they wanted? What if they were waiting for us, ready to turn us into pawns in their game? No. That was a question we couldn't afford to ask now. We needed to finish this. Grayson led us to a nondescript building nestled among the skyscrapers, its walls sleek and modern, but its atmosphere unmistakably cold. He'd done his research. This was it. "This is where the failsafe is hidden," Grayson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we need to be careful. This is Aegis's core operation. There are layers upon layers of security." I glanced. Around, eyes scanning the building, looking for weaknesses. "We'll break in, get to the core, and destroy Elysium." Dante's eyes narrowed. "And if they're waiting for us?" "We make sure they're not," I said, my voice unwavering. The final trial, we slipped into the building like shadows, using the night to our advantage. Every movement was deliberate, every step measured. Grayson led the way, his hacking skills opening doors we weren't supposed to access, his fingers dancing over the digital locks like they were nothing. But when we reached the final door, the one leading to the core of Aegis's operations, something was wrong. The lock clicked open easily, too easily. The door creaked as it opened, revealing an empty, sterile hallway. "Too quiet," Dante muttered. "This is a trap." "Stay focused," I said, stepping forward. "We don't have time to second-guess." But as we moved down the hallway, the lights flickered, casting ominous shadows against the walls. The buzzing of the lights became deafening, and suddenly, a voice echoed from nowhere. "You've come a long way." I froze. Holloway wasn't lying after all, the voice continued. "But you should have stayed in the shadows." I whipped, around, eyes searching for the source of the voice, but the hallway remained empty. "Who's there?" I demanded, my hand going to my gun. "You don't have to look far," the voice said again, now coming from the speakers lining the walls. "You've walked right into my game. You've been playing by my rules, but now I'm the one who decides." The temperature in the hall dropped. Something in the air changed. A strange feeling of dread crept into my bones. "We have no time for your games," Dante snapped, his hand tightening around his weapon. The voice chuckled, a sound filled with menace. "Game? You haven't even started yet." The moment of truth. The door at the end of the hallway slid open. Inside the room was a massive screen, and on it, a live feed. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. The screen displayed faces I recognized, my wife, Daniel Carter, and dozens of others. All of them. the voice said, as if reading my thoughts. All erased, all rewritten. You think you're going to stop me? You think you can undo everything I've done? I stepped forward, my mind racing. You're Aegis. The voice laughed again, this time without any humor. I'm Elysium. I'm the system. The room felt like it was closing in on me, suffocating with tension. Holloway's presence was a dark, unavoidable truth, the kind you couldn't escape even if you tried. His eyes gleamed, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights of the sterile room. A calculating smile spread across his face as he watched us, waiting for some sort of reaction. Surprised? He asked, his voice smooth, almost predatory. Dante's grip on his weapon tightened. You betrayed us. Holloway didn't flinch. Betrayed? I'm the one who's been trying to free you from Elysium. I'm the one who's been setting this entire game in motion. I shook my head, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. You played us. From the start, you were the one pulling the strings, weren't you? All of it, the chip, the safe house, the betrayals. You used us as pawns to get what you wanted. Exactly. Holloway's smile grew, but there was a cold edge to it, something devoid of empathy. Aegis and Elysium are two sides of the same coin, but the truth is, I am the system. I created it. You think you've been fighting for freedom, but you've been chasing shadows. Everything you've done. It was all a calculated risk. I felt a pit in my stomach. My mind raced. So all of it was part of his plan? Had we ever really had a chance? Had we simply been part of some twisted scheme? You've been running around in circles thinking you're one step ahead of everyone, Holloway continued. But all along, I've been right here, watching, waiting. His eyes flicked to the screen, displaying the faces of those we cared about, my wife, Daniel, and the rest. You were never meant to succeed. You were meant to serve as my distraction. Grayson's fingers twitched, and he took a step back. So, what now? You want us to just bow down and accept you as the master? Is that it? Holloway's gaze shifted to Grayson, the air between them crackling with tension. It's not about bowing down. It's about realizing the truth. The world doesn't change. The system doesn't change. You're just a small piece in the grand design. If you want to survive, you'll have to accept that I'm the one who controls it all. But you're no better than the people you're trying to take down, Dante snapped, stepping forward. You've manipulated us, used us just like they did. You're just another tyrant. I could feel the anger building in my chest, a fierce, unrelenting surge that threatened to break free. You're right about one thing, though, I said, my voice low and filled with tension. You've been playing the long game, and you've made one thing clear. There's no winning here, is there? Holloway raised an eyebrow. Not if you're still clinging to the idea of freedom. It's a myth. I am the future, and this world will be built on the foundation I've laid. But you, he looked at us coldly, you can still serve me. You'll be more than just pawns. I'll give you power, control. You'll help me shape this new world. Control, I repeated. By what? Betraying every single person who trusted us? No, Holloway said with a dangerous edge. By ending the lies. By erasing the system that's held you back and starting again. A moment of eerie silence followed his words. My mind screamed to resist, to reject the twisted offer. But beneath that, there was something else. A voice whispering a question I couldn't ignore. Could we actually succeed in bringing down Elysium? Could we defeat Holloway? I felt the weight of the data chip in my hand, burning with possibility. It wasn't just the fail-safe, it was the tool that could change everything. The ultimate decision. I turned to Dante and Grayson, the weight of the moment pressing on me. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for my lead, waiting for a decision. Grayson was the first to speak. I've been waiting for this, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. If this was Holloway's plan all along, we've walked into the lion's den. But maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe we make our own destiny now. Dante didn't share the same sentiment. We're not his tools. We can still bring him down. We still have the chip. We can still destroy this place, start over. It's not too late. Holloway's voice cut through the growing tension. Time's running out. What's it going to be? Join me, or face oblivion. It felt like everything was on the line now. The chips were all on the table, the stakes higher than ever. We had to make the decision that would change everything. The choice: destroy Elysium, activate the failsafe, burn everything down. No more games, no more hollow promises. The truth will be exposed, no matter what the cost. Betray Holloway, reject him, take the data chip, and sabotage his operation. It's dangerous, but it might just be the only way to stop him and Aegis once and for all. Join Holloway, accept his twisted offer, help him reshape the system. The power is within your grasp, but so is the weight of corruption. Can you live with what comes next? The decision is yours. The room fell into a suffocating silence, the tension like an invisible rope tightening around my chest. Holloway stood before us, a living symbol of everything we'd been fighting against. His eyes were cold, calculating, his smirk never fading, as if he already knew what our decision would be. He was the architect of our misery, the puppet master pulling strings in a game none of us had ever fully understood. And now, he was offering us the key, a chance to join him. I could feel Grayson's breath on my neck, the weight of his stare heavy. Dante was stiff, his hand gripping the handle of his gun, but his eyes flickered with doubt. Holloway's voice was low, seductive. You think you can take down Aegis? You've been fighting a shadow this whole time. But now you have a chance to control the light, to shape the world as you see fit. Join me, and we can build something that will last. No more running. No more secrets. I looked at him, my hand still clenched around the data chip. The world was in my grasp. In our grasp. All we had to do was make a decision, but this wasn't just a question of survival anymore. It wasn't even about freedom. It was about something deeper, more insidious. A test of morality, a challenge to our very souls. You're wrong, Holloway. Dante's voice was razor-sharp, cutting through the stillness like a blade. He took a step forward, his face hard, his resolve clear. You don't get to decide the world's fate. We're not going to be your puppets. We're going to burn it down. I turned to Dante, the fire in his eyes a mirror of my own anger. We had come so far to give up now. To give in to Holloway would mean losing everything we stood, for losing every life we had fought to protect. Grayson, however, remained quiet, his face unreadable. The digital genius who had always been the first to calculate, to assess every move. But this wasn't a game of numbers anymore. This was about right and wrong. Grayson, I asked, my voice hoarse. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced between us. Dante, his fury palpable, and me, my soul torn by the weight of the decision. Finally, he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. If we destroy this system, we destroy ourselves too, don't we? Holloway's offer, it's tempting. We'd have control, we could reshape everything. But at what cost? I countered, my voice harsh. We would become no better than him, no better than the monsters we've been hunting. There was a long pause before Grayson spoke again, quieter this time. The problem with revolution is that it never ends. It doesn't matter if we take down Aegis because there will always be something else, someone else, waiting to fill the power vacuum. But you're right. We can't let Holloway win. My heart skipped. So, we take the chip and end this? No more games? No more games, Grayson said firmly. It ends now. I nodded, turning back to Holloway. He stood there, his expression still unreadable, but his eyes flickered with something darker. Frustration. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can tear it all down and start fresh, but that's not how the world works. You're already too deep. All you're doing is—" "I know exactly what I'm doing," I interrupted, stepping forward with a grim determination. "And this ends today." Without another word, I slammed the data chip into the terminal, feeling it lock into place. The machine hummed to life, lights flashing across the screen as the failsafe system activated. I could almost hear Holloway's heartbeat quicken in the silence, his plan unraveling before his very eyes. "No!" he roared. "You're making a mistake." The terminal beeped, signaling the start of the shutdown process. The walls trembled. It felt like the earth itself was shifting beneath us. Outside the building, I could hear the faint whir of sirens, a reminder that time was running out. But it didn't matter. We had already sealed the deal. The data on the screen began to change, lines of code scrolling faster than I could read. We had no time to decipher the specifics. I could feel Holloway's eyes burning into my back, but I ignored him. There was only one thing left to do. "It's over," I whispered under my breath, watching as the heart of Elysium started to die. The fall of Aegis, the room darkened as the system that had held the city and its secrets together for so long began to crumble. The walls seemed to shake in rhythm with the fall of the empire that had controlled so many lives, including ours. For a moment, everything was still. No one moved, no one spoke. The hum of the machines faded, replaced by the eerie silence of powerlessness. Holloway stepped back, his face pale, his confidence shattered. "You think you've won?" he said, his voice suddenly quieter, more defeated. "You think this will change anything? The system is bigger than you." "I don't care what you think anymore," Dante replied, his eyes cold. "It's over." I didn't look back. The streets of Geneva seemed eerily quiet in the wake of the chaos we'd set into motion. The towering buildings that once symbolized Aegis's reign now stood like hollow sentinels, their windows reflecting the fractured sky above. The world we had known was gone, dismantled piece by piece in the blink of an eye. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to breathe. We'd destroyed Elysium, broken the hold that had kept the world in chains for so long. But as I stepped away from the ruins of the building, a realization settled in. The work wasn't over. "We did it," Dante said, breaking the silence between us, his voice quiet but steady. "But now we've got to pick up the pieces." He was right. The system was shattered, but the world wasn't fixed. People were still trapped in the chaos, the void left by the fall of Aegis, wondering what came next. Grayson stood to the side, looking at the ruins of the facility with a heavy heart. "We've stopped Holloway? But what if something worse takes his place?" He looked at me, his voice laced with concern. "Power vacuums don't leave empty spaces for long. Someone else will rise, someone who might be just as dangerous, if not more." I met his gaze. "We can't fix everything right away, but at least we can start." The decision looms. We sat down at a small cafe, the city still reeling from the shockwaves of what we'd done. The tables were empty for the most part, the air thick with uncertainty. But we knew we couldn't linger in the shadows forever. We had to decide what came next. Our actions had already reshaped the world, and now it was up to us to determine the course of the future. "So," Dante began, looking between Grayson and me, "what do we do now? Do we take control? Or do we fade into the background and let the world rebuild on its own?" I rubbed my temples, the weight of the decision pressing on me like a vice. "We can't just disappear. We can't walk away from this mess and pretend everything will fix itself. Someone has to step up, but we have to be careful. Power's dangerous. It's what got us into this mess in the first place." Grayson nodded. "We need to rebuild the system, but we need to be the ones who redefine it. We can't let the same mistakes happen again." "But," Dante said, his voice turning serious, "do we really have the right to decide who gets to live in this world? Who gets to control the power?" How do we even trust ourselves after everything we've been through? There was truth in his words. We had already taken control of so many lives, manipulated the system, and betrayed those we cared about. How? Could we be the ones to wield power without falling into the same traps that Holloway had? I don't know if we have the right, I said quietly. But I do know that if we don't try, no one will. The system needs a new foundation. Something built on transparency and truth. Maybe we can create something better, or at least try. The path forward. The sun began to set over the city, casting long shadows across the streets. I realized that the hardest part wasn't winning the war. It was what came after. We had taken down the giant, but now we had to rebuild. And there were two paths before us. Take control. We could seize the remnants of Aegis, reshape the world in our image. We could establish a new order, one that didn't repeat the mistakes of the past. But with power comes the temptation to corrupt, to slip into the same behaviors that Holloway and others had shown us. Escape the chaos. We could walk away, disappearing, into the shadows, leaving the world to figure it out on its own. Perhaps someone else would rise up to lead. Maybe we could be the silent guardians from the shadows, ensuring the world didn't descend into further chaos. But could we truly leave behind the responsibility we'd set into motion? As I looked at the faces of my companions, I knew that neither choice would be easy. But in the end, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about what kind of world we would leave behind. The final decision, option 1. Take control. We could establish a new order. We would rebuild the system from the ground up, ensuring that transparency, honesty, and the people's freedom were at the heart of it all. But power, true power, would come with its own challenges. Would we be able to resist the temptation to abuse it? Option 2. Escape the chaos. We could leave, fade into the shadows, and let the world figure it out on its own. We could keep running, but there was always the risk that someone more ruthless than Holloway would take the reins, and this time we might not be around to stop them. Epilogue. The world beyond. What did we choose? Time would tell. The world was ours to shape, but how we did so would define us forever. It would take courage, sacrifice, and the strength to never forget the lessons of the past. Perhaps the greatest challenge wasn't defeating the system. Perhaps the greatest challenge was not becoming the thing we sought to destroy. The air was thick with uncertainty as we stood at the crossroads of history, the remnants of ages crumbling behind us. But as the sky bled with the colors of a new dawn, there was a sense of possibility, a feeling that the future was ours to shape. If only we had the courage to do so. I looked at Dante, then at Grayson. They were as torn as I was. The weight of the decision hung in the air, and for a moment, none of us knew which way to turn. "Time's running out," Dante said, breaking the silence. "If we don't make a move, someone else will, and I don't trust anyone else to do it right." "I know," I replied, my voice heavy with the burden of responsibility. "We can't just let the void swallow everything we've fought for." Grayson, who had been silent for the longest time, finally spoke up, his voice measured. "There's no perfect choice. The world is broken and we're not going to fix it overnight. But we can try. We can set the foundation for something better. Option 1. Take control." We knew what it meant to take control. It wasn't just about power. It was about shaping the future, creating a new system that could rise from the ashes of the old one. Aegis had been a monster, its reign built on secrecy, manipulation, and control. Now we had a chance to do it differently. We had the power to rebuild, to create a world where truth and freedom were no longer sacrificed at the altar of power, but it came with its own dangers. We'd seen what power could do to people. We'd seen Holloway's rise, and we knew that it wasn't always about doing the right thing. The line between hero and villain was thinner than we cared to admit. Could we avoid falling into the same traps? Would we, too, become the very thing we had fought against? I think we can do it differently, Dante said, his voice rising with newfound conviction. We can establish a new order, not one that controls the people, but one that listens to them. We need a system built on accountability. And what happens when the first mistake is made? Grayson interjected, his voice low. Who takes the blame? Who takes the fall? That's where we come in, I said, looking between them both. We have to lead, not from the top, but from the people. We have to make sure no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law. There was a long pause as we all processed the gravity of what we were proposing. A new world, a new order, but with no guarantee that it would succeed. A risky choice, but perhaps the only one that mattered. Option 2, escape the chaos. The alternative was equally difficult, walking away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving the world to rebuild on its own. This option was tempting in its simplicity. The weight of responsibility would fall from our shoulders. We could go somewhere far away, where the ghosts of Elysium wouldn't follow, and start over. But as I looked at Grayson and Dante, I could see the conflict in their eyes. None of us had signed up for quiet lives. The world needed us, whether we wanted to admit it or not. Running away would mean giving up on everything we had fought for. It would mean accepting that the fight was too big, too complicated to win. We could run, I said, almost whispering the words to myself as if to see how they tasted. But it's not what we're meant to do. I don't think we could live with ourselves if we did. We wouldn't be running away from the problem, Grayson replied, his voice quiet but firm. We'd be letting the next person take control, and that person could be worse than Holloway. And what if we don't know how to fix it? Dante asked, shaking his head. We've been through hell. The idea of just walking away, it sounds so damn easy. Easier than standing and fighting, I said, my voice raw. But maybe this time, fighting is the only choice we have, a decision made. The conversation stretched on for hours, the weight of what we were deciding almost too much to bear. But in the end, we knew what had to be done. We couldn't let the world slip back into darkness, couldn't allow it to fall into the hands of another tyrant. The people were ready for a change, whether they knew it or not. They had been living under the weight of secrets, lies, and corruption for too long, and now it was time for us to rise. We take control, I said, my voice firm. But we do it differently. We do it together, with transparency, with accountability. We build a world where the people have a voice, and we make sure that no one, not even us, can take that power for granted. Dante nodded, a grim smile forming on his lips. Let's get to work then. Grayson stood up, his hands resting on the table as if he had already mapped out 1,000 possible scenarios. We'll need allies, he said, his mind already racing. We can't do this alone. We'll find them, I said, rising from my seat. But first we need to secure the foundation. Without that, nothing else matters. The months following our decision to take control were both a whirlwind and a slow burn. We had set out to rebuild, to restore what had been broken, but we were soon reminded that the past never truly lets go. It clung to us like the remnants of a storm, its echoes following us every step of the way. We had secured the foundations of a new government, a council that would balance power and prevent corruption. But the streets, the people, we couldn't control their fears and doubts. The collapse of Aegis had been swift, but the consequences were far-reaching. The world was in a fragile state, and not everyone was ready for the changes we were pushing. Some resisted us, not out of hatred, but out of a fear that things were too unstable, too uncertain. But even in the face of all this, I couldn't stop. We couldn't stop. We had come too far. A new world, A new fight as I walked through the halls of the new council building. My eyes scanned the faces of those who had joined us. There were many who had pledged their loyalty to the cause, but the weight of their gaze told me something different. There were some who questioned our ability to lead, who doubted our sincerity, and that made me wonder, could we really build this new world without losing ourselves in the process? It's not as easy as we thought, is it? Grayson asked me one evening as we sat in the dimly lit war room surrounded by digital maps and data projections. His voice was filled with the weariness of someone who had seen the raw underbelly of change. No, I replied, but it never is. If we wanted easy, we wouldn't have fought this long. Dante leaned in, his eyes sharp. We've been fighting for freedom, but freedom always comes at a price. We're not just dismantling a system. We're disrupting the very fabric of how people live, how they think. They don't want to believe the world can change. I know, I said, rubbing my temples. But we can't let fear control us. Fear is the same thing that gave Holloway his power in the first place. We have to show them that a better world is possible. As we continued to map out the strategy for the future, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking a fine line. Every decision was a gamble, and there was no guarantee that the world would fall in line with our ideals. We had to be stronger than the fear that clung to the old system. But fear, I realized, wasn't the only thing we had to worry about. There were still those who had their own agenda, who were waiting for their opportunity to fill the void we had left. And as we had learned in our fight against Aegis, power abhors a vacuum, the return of old enemies. The first signs of trouble came quietly, a few whispers among the ranks, a couple of well-placed rumors, but before long it became clear that the forces who had profited from the old regime were not just going to fade into the background. They were regrouping, biding their time. It was a few months after the council had been established when the first real challenge arrived. A mysterious figure, known only as the Architect, began to make waves. There were rumors that he had once been a high-ranking official in Aegis, someone whose name had been wiped from every record after the fall. But the power he wielded was undeniable. He was gathering followers, rebuilding the network that had once powered the corrupt system. I stood on the balcony of our council headquarters one evening, looking out over the city, the cold wind biting at my skin. I wasn't sure if I was bracing for the storm or if I was simply trying to absorb the moment of peace before everything came crashing down again. He's out there, isn't he? Dante's voice broke through my thoughts. I nodded, not turning to look at him. The Architect. He's not just trying to rebuild Aegis, he's trying to control everything again. And he has the resources to do it. Grayson stepped up beside us, his eyes scanning the horizon. We need to find him before he has a chance to mobilize. If we don't, we could lose everything we've worked for. There was no question now. We had to take the fight back to him. We couldn't allow the past to rise again, no matter how much we had already changed the world. A plan of action. We met in the war room again, the walls filled with blueprints, surveillance, data, and a web of connections that stretched across the globe. The Architect had infiltrated more than just the remnants of Aegis. He was connected, and his influence was spreading faster than we could contain. We have to hit him where it hurts, I said, my voice sharp with determination. We have to go after his network, his resources, cut him off before he gains any more momentum. Grayson nodded. We can't take him down all at once. We need to be surgical about this. Hit his most vulnerable assets, the places where he's weakest. And what if we fail? Dante asked, his voice low but intense. What if we miscalculate, and he takes us down first? The winds of change, it seemed, never stopped blowing. Even after the fall of the Architect, there was no sense of relief. The world, the new world we had tried so desperately to rebuild, was not going to settle easily. It was as if the very fabric of the old system still clung to the edges of every decision, every action we took. But despite the looming uncertainty, there was an undeniable shift in the air. The old world was still in its death throes, and the new one was being born from the ashes of its predecessor. And as we all knew, when something new emerges from the chaos, it is often not just a birth, but a battle for survival. The price of victory. In the weeks following the architect's defeat, we had been hailed as heroes. The council was now firmly in place, with an ironclad mandate to reshape the world. People spoke of us in reverent tones, as though we were the answer to all the injustices of the past. But we knew better. "I've been thinking," Dante said. One night, his voice low as he stared at the night sky from the balcony of our new headquarters. "We took down the architect, but his shadow still lingers. His influence didn't just disappear overnight. There are remnants of him, his loyalists, still out there, pulling strings, waiting for the right moment to rise again." Grayson, as usual, had been quiet for some time, his mind clearly working through something deeper than the surface-level conversation we were having. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold and calculating. "And we've become the target, haven't we? We're the new power. The more we succeed, the more enemies we'll make. This world doesn't like change, especially not the kind of change we're pushing." I sighed deeply, rubbing the bridge of my nose. "You're right, but we can't stop. Not now. The moment we do, everything we've fought for will crumble." The price of victory, I had come to realize, was not just measured in the battles we fought or the enemies we overcame. It was measured in the sacrifices we made along the way, the lives we had touched, the people we had lost, and the part of ourselves we had left behind to build a world that might not even survive. The fissures in the foundation. As we worked tirelessly to rebuild the world, the fissures in our foundation began to widen. Old power structures, underground organizations, wealthy elites, covert networks started to push back. And not all of it was external. Some of it came from within our very own council. There were whispers, disagreements, rivalries. Had always known that power was a dangerous thing. Even the most noble of intentions could corrupt when faced with the allure of control. And now, as we began to reshape the global economy, establish new systems of governance, and offer the people a new chance, I couldn't ignore the subtle, but growing unrest. "Something's not right," Grayson said one day as we convened in the council chambers. His expression was grim, more so than usual. "I've been tracking the council members. Some of them are making moves, small, calculated moves, to consolidate power. They're not all with us anymore." Dante ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. "Damn it, I knew it. I knew we couldn't just keep things clean forever. These people have always wanted control. They're growing impatient." "I'll handle it," I said, rising from my seat. "I'll confront them. We can't let this fester." But even as the words left my lips, I couldn't help but wonder, had we become the very thing we sought to destroy? Had we traded one form of tyranny for another? The seeds of doubt. The truth hit me slowly, like the quiet drip of water that carves through rock. We were no longer the underdogs, fighting for justice in a broken world. We were the establishment. We had become the new power, the new regime, and that carried its own weight, its own set of compromises. There were rumors, unsettling ones. Some said that our enemies had already infiltrated the council. Others whispered that certain council members were secretly plotting against us, seeking to overthrow the very system we had fought to establish. I spent sleepless nights sifting through reports, looking for any signs of betrayal. And sure enough, there were discrepancies. Financial records were falsified. Communications between council members had been intercepted. Trust, the very foundation of our work, was starting to crack. "I didn't sign up for this," Dante said one evening, as we sat together in the war room. "I thought we were going to change the world, not just keep the cycle going. Look at us. Look at what we're becoming. His words echoed in the silence. Was this the cost of change? Had we let our mission corrupt us? And were we too far gone to even recognize it? Grayson leaned back in his chair, his arms folded. We're fighting on all fronts now, the ones who want power, the ones who want to stay in control of the old systems. But also, the storm was upon us, and the world we had fought to rebuild teetered on the edge of collapse. The days that followed the uprising were filled with confusion, betrayal, and violence. The city that had once buzzed with hope now simmered with distrust and fear. Streets that had been vibrant with the sounds of revolution now echoed with the silence of uncertainty. Our enemies, once in the shadows, had emerged from the cracks, ready to claim the power they thought had been unjustly stolen from them. The council had splintered, fractured by personal ambitions and rivalries, and the very people we had fought for were now questioning whether we were the heroes they had once believed us to be. Doubt had entered every corner of our minds, a poison that slowly eroded our resolve. The weight of our decisions. I stood alone on the balcony, watching the world below. The streets were empty, save for the occasional group of protesters, their faces grim, their signs demanding accountability. I had seen it before. This was the price of disillusionment. The world was tired of broken promises, tired of leaders who had become nothing more than the shadows of those they had fought against. I wasn't sure if we had already crossed the line or if we were still teetering on the edge, but it was becoming increasingly clear. The battle for the future of the world wasn't just against those who had opposed us. It was against ourselves. Are we doing the right thing? Dante's voice broke through my thoughts, and I turned to see him approaching, his face a mixture of concern and determination. Doing the right thing, I repeated, almost to myself. I'm not sure there is a right anymore. Not in this world. We're too far gone, Dante. We've been fighting for so long, we've forgotten why we were fighting, Dante said softly. We can't keep running from our choices. We made them, and now we have to live with them. I closed my eyes for a moment, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Could we still fix this, or had we become the very thing we had set out to destroy, a plan of desperation? The council was in disarray. Our enemies were not just external forces anymore. They had infiltrated our ranks, wielding power from within. There were whispers that some of our closest allies were now working with the rebels, planning to tear down everything we had built. And yet, despite everything, we still held a sliver of control. There was still time to make a final stand. We just had to decide if it was worth it. We can't run, Grayson said, his voice as hard as steel. If we run now, everything we fought for is over, all of it. But how do we fight what's inside? I asked. We've already lost the trust of the people. Some of them are beyond redemption. I don't care about their trust, Dante snapped, his eyes blazing. The people are lost, but we owe it to them to show that we're still standing. We can't give up, not like this. It was hard to argue with that. After everything, after Holloway, after Aegis, after the architect, we had to make sure our fight meant something, not just for us, but for everyone who had believed in us. A dangerous proposition. In the quiet hours of the night, as the city burned in the distance, I received an unexpected message from an old acquaintance. Mira, the woman who had once been a part of Aegis's intelligence division, now turned rogue operative, had reached out with a proposition. She claimed to have located a secret weapon, something that could tip the scales in our favor. A device, hidden away by the remnants of Aegis, that could either destroy our enemies or take control of the entire system. We can't trust her, Grayson warned when I brought it up. Mira's played both sides before. She's dangerous. But the temptation was undeniable. This was the kind of power we needed to bring an end to the chaos. If it worked, it would give us the leverage we needed to regain control. But if it didn't, we have no choice, I said, my voice firm. If this works, it'll give us the chance to start over. If it doesn't, we'll be finished. Dante nodded grimly. Then let's do it. Let's end this once and for all. The final descent Mira's location was a heavily fortified compound in a remote area, buried deep in the mountains. We had no time to waste. We gathered a small team of our most trusted operatives, prepared for the worst, and set out. There was no room for error. If this went wrong, there would be no turning back. As we approached the compound, the tension was palpable. Every shadow, every gust of wind seemed to heighten our awareness. There was no trust in the air, not in each other, not in our mission, only a shared desperation to survive. When we breached the compound's outer defenses, it was like walking into a tomb. The silence was suffocating, and the dimly lit hallways felt like they were closing in on us. "Where is she?" I demanded as we moved deeper into the facility, my hand on the hilt of my weapon. The world had changed. But change, as I was beginning to understand, is not always as liberating as it sounds. In our quest to give people the power to make their own decisions, we had unknowingly opened a floodgate of unpredictability. The chaos that followed Mira's betrayal was a bittersweet symphony of liberation and destruction. The world was fractured into countless pieces, each one now having the power to shape its own future, for better or for worse. I stood on the edge of the shattered city, staring out at the horizon where once there had been order and structure. Now there were only questions, uncertainty, and the faintest trace of hope. The sky was painted with the soft hues of dawn, but even the beauty of the moment couldn't dispel the weight of what had happened. The truth was clear. We had broken the system, but we hadn't yet built anything new to replace it. The new world. Unearthed, as the dust settled, new factions began to form. Some were remnants of the old guard, those who had once been loyal to the architect, the people who had benefited from control, and now they sought to restore what was lost. Others were the idealists, the dreamers who had believed in the revolution, but quickly realized that power wasn't the answer. It was freedom, true freedom, without the chains of manipulation and hidden agendas. In the midst of all this, a question lingered. Who had the right to decide what came next? "We can't let this fall into the wrong hands," Grayson said one night as we sat around a table in the now-defunct council chambers. The walls were scarred with remnants of battles past, and the once grand room now felt hollow. The world is on the brink of collapsing, and we can't afford to sit back and watch. I nodded, my thoughts clouded. But what if we don't have the answers anymore, Grayson? We fought for change, and now we're just like everyone else, trying to control the uncontrollable. Dante, always the optimist, leaned forward. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not supposed to control it. We gave them control. Now we have to trust them." Trust. That word had become a cruel joke. After all the betrayal, the shifting, alliances, the power struggles, could we really trust anyone, especially ourselves? The whispering voices, it wasn't long before whispers began to spread through the new world. They came from every corner, from the pockets of resistance that still clung to the shadows, from the rebels who saw us as traitors to the cause. A new war was quietly brewing, a war not just for territory or resources, but for the very soul of this fractured world. I had heard the rumors of a new faction, led by a man known only as the Sovereign. His movements were subtle at first, but they were gaining momentum. His followers believed that the only way to truly restore order was to rebuild the system from the ground up, only this time with a single ruler at the top, someone who would guide them with absolute authority. I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread at the thought. It was the same cycle. just in a new form. The thirst for control, for power, it never truly faded. We need to know who they are, where they're coming from, Grayson said, his voice urgent. If the sovereign gains enough influence, we'll have another dictatorship on our hands. The people will fall for it. They always do. I stood up from my seat, pacing the room. What if we're missing something? What if this is the true test? Not about controlling the world or fixing it, but about allowing people to make their own decisions, no matter how chaotic it gets? Maybe the sovereign is just another figurehead, someone people will turn to out of fear or desperation. But that's not the answer. But we can't let this become a free-for-all either, Dante said, his voice hard. We've fought too hard to let the old world take over again. We have to stop the sovereign, the ghost of the architect. The search for the sovereign became an obsession for all of us. We sent spies, infiltrated various groups, and used every resource at our disposal to trace his movements. The more we uncovered, the more we realized that the sovereign was not just some opportunist trying to seize power. He was a man with a vision, a man who believed that only through authoritarian rule could humanity survive the chaos we had unleashed. And then, in the midst of our investigation, we found something chilling. The sovereign's rise wasn't just fueled by his own ambitions, it was linked to the architect. The architect hadn't been completely vanquished. His network, his teachings, his plans had been passed on to the sovereign. This wasn't just a new leader. It was a new face of the old world. Are we really doing this again? I muttered to myself as the weight of the realization hit me. Have we created a monster only for it to come back with a new mask? I don't think. This is just about the sovereign, Dante said quietly, his voice carrying the same sense of dread I felt. The days following the decision felt like an endless stretch of twilight. There was no clear path forward, no certainty, only the relentless pull of doubt and the weight of our past decisions pressing down on us. The sovereign's forces were growing stronger by the day, their influence creeping through the cracks of society like a silent disease. But even in the midst of that darkness, something unexpected began to stir. The people, those who had been caught in the whirlwind of the revolution, those who had once been mere pawns in a game of power, were starting to wake up. They were no longer waiting for someone to dictate their future. They were standing up, taking control of their own destinies. The shift was small at first, a subtle undercurrent that none of us had anticipated. But the movement was gaining momentum. The seeds of change. I walked through the remnants of the old city, the streets still scarred from the battles we had fought. The fires that had once raged here had burned away much of the old world, but in their ashes, new growth had begun to take root. Small groups of people were organizing, creating their own councils, setting up new systems of government, each one built on the foundation of community, not power. Grayson was beside me, his eyes scanning the crowds of people who were rebuilding, not just the city, but their way of life. There was a quiet pride in his voice when he spoke, though it was tempered with the knowledge that there was still so much more to be done. "It's happening," he said, his voice steady. "The change we dreamed of, but it's not perfect, not yet." I nodded, the weight of those words settling over me like a heavy fog. We gave them the tools. Now, it's up to them to decide if they're going to use them wisely. "We've made our mistakes," Grayson continued. "But we've also given them a chance to learn from them. That's the only thing we can do now. The sovereign's gambit, but not everyone was ready to let go of the past. The sovereign, ever the shadow lurking behind the throne, was far from done. He had found allies among the old guard, remnants of the authoritarian regime that had once ruled with an iron fist. These were the people who refused to accept the new world we were building. They saw the chaos, the uncertainty, and they believed that only through strength, through control, could society survive? His message was simple. The world needs a ruler, a true leader who will take charge and restore order. Without this, chaos will reign. But his words, while enticing to some, were falling on deaf ears among the growing number of people who wanted nothing more than to be free from the very thing the sovereign represented. As his influence spread, so too did the resistance, a resistance that was not united by a single ideology, but by a shared desire to make their own choices, to reject the idea of power centralized in the hands of one man. The unlikely alliance, the struggle for the future of this fractured world, was no longer just about ideology. It was about humanity itself. And that truth was more complicated than I had ever imagined. Dante and I found ourselves at the center of a delicate negotiation. In a dimly lit room surrounded by figures from all walks of life, farmers, scholars, former soldiers, and revolutionaries, a new alliance was born. It wasn't about overthrowing the sovereign or anyone else. It was about giving people the freedom to determine their own fate. It was about forging a future based not on the strength of the few, but on the choices of the many. "You think this will work?" Dante asked, his voice skeptical. "These people, they're all so different. How do we unify them under one banner?" "They've already united, whether we like it or not," I replied. "They want the same thing: freedom, the ability to shape their own lives. If we help them understand that, maybe we can create something that doesn't collapse under its own weight." Grayson entered the room at that moment, his expression grim. "The sovereign is gathering his forces. We don't have much time. We need to make a stand now, before he turns this into another war." I felt a shiver of foreboding. Another war. The thought was suffocating. But as I looked around the room at these people, ordinary, broken, yet filled with the flicker of hope, I realized something. War had always been about control. But this time, the fight wasn't for power. This time, it was for choice. The battle for tomorrow. The day arrived sooner than we had expected. The sovereign, his forces marching like an unstoppable wave, reached the gates of the city. We had no grand army to meet him, no weapons of mass destruction. But we had something more powerful than that: the people. As the sovereign's army approached, we gathered at the center of the city, standing shoulder to shoulder with those who had once been strangers, now united by a singular purpose. The sovereign's forces were numerous,